Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, before we begin today's event, we kindly invite you to sing the national anthem of Indonesia, Indonesia Raya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, and may peace be upon you. A warm welcome to the Director of Bank Indonesia Institute, Dr. Cecilia Harun, and Ibu Erma Kusumawati, our esteemed speakers and guests, the Honorable Professor Iwan Jaya Azis, our research fellow and author of the Monetary Whispers Across Space, our distinguished discussants for today's book launch, guest participants from Bank Indonesia, and all esteemed guests and participants. Please allow me, Michelle Marietta, to serve you as the master of the ceremony and guide you through today's event. Before we begin today's event, we would like to invite you to join us in a silent prayer, a moment of reflections to offer our thoughts, gratitude, and intention to the Almighty God. Moment of silence, begin. May this moment bring us peace, clarity, and renewed strength. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and privilege for us today gather here this morning to witness the launch of Monetary Whispers Across Spaces, written by Professor Iwan Jaya Azis in collaborations with Bank Indonesia Institute. This book explored the dynamic of development and economic growth across various regions of Indonesia while inviting us to understand why, despite the nation's rapid progress, some regions remain underdeveloped, experience stagnation, and have yet to fully benefit from equitable distribution of development. To mark the beginning of today's sessions, we are delighted to invite the Director of Bank Indonesia Institute to deliver her opening remarks. With a great respect, we invite Dr. Cecilia Harun to deliver the opening remarks. The time is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. To Honorable Professor Iwan Jaya Azis, our research fellow and the author of Monetary Whispers Across Space, Head of Departments and Bank Indonesia Representative Office, our distinguished discussants for today's book launch, Professor Budy and Resosudarmo, Head of NU in Indonesia Project, Dr. Sudarno Sumarto, Senior Research Fellow, the SMERU Research Institute, Dr. Luky, Ekos Wuryanto, Vice President of ASEAN Infrastructure and Investment Bank, AIIB, Bapak Tedy Alamsyah, Chairman of Perhimpunan Bank Perkreditan Rakyat Indonesia, Professor Bernadette Robiani, Vice Rector of Universitas Sriwijaya, esteemed guests from NU Indonesia Project community, partner institutions, practitioners, academia, research institutions, and participants online from Indonesia and abroad. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, peace be upon us all. Good morning. First, let us extend our praise and gratitude to Allah, the Almighty God. It is by His grace and blessing that we are able to gather here today for the launch of Bank Indonesia Institute's collaborative work in a book with Professor Iwan Jaya Azis entitled Monetary Whispers Across Space. We love this title so much. This publication marks another milestone in Bank Indonesia Institute's long-standing collaboration with Professor Iwan Jaya Azis, following two previous books, Periphery and Small Ones Matter, Interplay of Policy and Social Capital, and also the other book is Listen and Design on Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises. I really encourage you to download all these books from Springer. Today's book launch event is specifically held in collaboration with Forum Kajian Pembangunan or FKP. This forum was initiated by Australian National University NU, Indonesia Project, and LPEM as a platform for researchers, policymakers, and practitioners to exchange views, discuss current policy issues, and promote high-quality research. Bank Indonesia has also been involved in the Forum Kajian Pembangunan organizing committee, and it is an honor for us to host today's sessions. Distinguished guests and participants, in today's forum, we will discuss a highly important and timely issue, economic inequality, with a particular focus on interregional inequality. This issue warrants serious attention and should be taken into consideration in policymaking, including monetary policy, as widening disparities among regions can influence national economic performance and the inclusiveness of economic growth. In Indonesia, reducing the economic disparities across regions remain a major challenge, particularly between Java and the rest of the country. These disparities have been shaped by long-standing historical and structural factors. For decades, Java has been the center of government and political administration and has benefited from relatively stronger infrastructure and a more developed industrial base. Its large concentration of population and economic activity have also contributed to faster growth than in many other regions. Drawing on evidence from other countries, there is no one-size-fits-all approach in reducing inequality. Some countries rely on progressive taxation, while others adopt stronger state-led development policy. Even when similar policy approach and instruments are used, the outcomes can differ significantly across countries. The key question, therefore, is what kind of approach would be most suitable for Indonesia? And this is a very, very expensive question. This important topic will be further discussed by Professor Iwan Jaya Azis, our distinguished research fellow, who has recently authored an insightful and influential book entitled Monetary Whispers Across Space. The book presents evidence on interregional inequality in Indonesia, explores its underlying causes, and examines its implications for national economic growth. More importantly, we will also take a deeper look on how monetary policy transmission operates at the regional level and how it may shape the dynamics of interregional inequality. It provides valuable insights into current policy implication and into how policy effectiveness can be improved. We are also privileged to be joined today by our distinguished discussants. Drawing on their respective areas of expertise, they will further enrich today's discussion by sharing their perspectives on the book's key finding, as well as on the challenges and opportunities associated with narrowing regional economic disparities and fostering more inclusive and balanced growth. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Bank Indonesia Institute, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to Professor Iwan Jaya Azis for his valuable research and important contribution to this policy discussion. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Forum Kajian Pembangunan Organizing Committee, our distinguished discussants, partner institutions, and all participants for joining us today and contributing to this forum. I hope that today's discussion will provide a constructive platform for exchanging ideas, generating valuable policy insights, and strengthening our shared efforts to promote more inclusive and balanced development across Indonesia. Thank you, and I wish all of us a meaningful discussion. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Cecilia, for the warm remarks. We now have arrived to the moment that we all been waiting for, the official book launch of Monetary Whispers Across Space. To unveil this remarkable work, please join us in watching the launch video.
Indonesia has made remarkable progress in economic growth and national development. Yet many regions outside Java and eastern Indonesia continue to face significant development challenges. Over the years, numerous policies have been implemented to promote more balanced development across Indonesia. Many of these efforts were intended to narrow the gap between more developed and less developed regions, yet regional This book, written by Professor Iwan Jaya Azis, Research Fellow at Bank Indonesia Institute. This book aims to improve the conduct of macroeconomic policy by better aligning macro-level objectives with the urgent need for equitable and balanced regional development. Interregional inequality in Indonesia is actually worsening. The gap in worker productivity has widened drastically. In 2023, the productivity gap between the highest performing region, Jakarta, and the lowest, Nusa Tenggara Timur, reached a staggering 21-to-1 ratio, proving that sustainable growth capacity remains severely unequal. A major driver of this gap is the retail trade sector. While it employs the most people nationwide, its productivity is low and continuing to fall, dragging down overall national economic growth. Moreover, economic benefits flow unevenly. For every rupiah of productivity generated outside Java, roughly 76% of the financial benefits flows back to Java. Yet, when productivity is generated in Java, only 40% trickles out to the rest of the country. This inequality makes monetary policies less effective. When money is injected into less developed regions through local loans, it quickly leaks back into developed regions to pay for goods and services. Monetary Whispers Across Space reveals how national monetary policies interact with regional inequalities. Published as an open access book, Monetary Whispers Across Space is freely available to everyone. Access your copy through the link on your screen.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to commemorate this special occasions, we will now have a group photo sessions together. And please be ready for our photo sessions, and we will going to take a screenshot. So please allow us to count down, ladies and gentlemen, in 3, 2, 1. Once again in 3, 2, 1. Maybe once again, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to request a little bit of pose together with the audience with an L sign, which means L for literacy. Ladies and gentlemen, please put on the best pose for the camera. And we're going to start another photo session together in 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we now have the privilege to gain deeper insight into the book of Monetary Whispers Across Space. Let us now proceed to this morning discussions. To help us to do that, we are joined by an incredible panel of experts for today's discussions. It is our great honor to have Ms. Lydia Napitupulu as the moderator for these discussions. And before we invite her to the floor, allow me to introduce an overview of her remarkable background. Ms. Lydia Napitupulu currently serves as the Secretariat of the Forum Kajian Pembangunan. She is also the Indonesia Liaison Officer for the Australia National University, or ANU Indonesia project. In addition to her amazing experience, she is also a lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Business Universitas Indonesia. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Lydia Napitupulu.
Good morning, everyone. And Michelle, thank you for that fantastic introduction. I hardly recognize myself in that introduction. Good morning, everyone. And good evening, Professor Iwan Jaya Azis. I believe it's now very late at night in Athaca. Thank you very much for your time. And good day, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you, Bank Indonesia Institute, for inviting Forum Kajian Pembangunan to launch this book. It's an honor for us, and personally, it's an honor for me to be invited as chair of this very distinguished panel of speakers. So without further ado, we would like to kindly invite Professor Iwan Jaya Azis. Of course, he needs no introduction. Professor at Cornell University's Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management. And he's also a professor at Faculty of Economics and Business Universitas Indonesia. And currently research fellow, of course, at Bank Indonesia Institute. Pak Iwan, the floor is yours. We have, I believe, around 20 minutes for you to introduce the book and to let us know what should we be getting, what message should we be getting from the book. Silakan, Pak Iwan.
Thank you, Lydia. And first of all, let me thank the leadership of Bank Indonesia, who has been providing facilities and opportunities for me to do a series of research, as was mentioned earlier by Evie, that I've been involved in a series of research activities through the BINS, Bank Indonesia Institute, And this is the third time, actually. So this is the third book that is published. And for those who do not know, this book was completed last year, actually. So this is, in a way, it's a bit late, kind of launching of the book. Because as a matter of fact, after this book, there is another book which is already completed last month. So I don't know when it will be launched. And currently, I'm also writing another book. Anyway, so the background of the book is basically based on the framework of thinking, which is shown in this one slide. So the whole idea is that I have been obsessed by sort of desire to understand what is really the link between macroeconomics and the microeconomic issues. And in particular, today, in this book, I'm looking at specific macro policy, i.e. the monetary policy, and specific microeconomic issues, i.e. interregional inequality. Now, everybody knows that those two have their own distinct kind of domain. So they have their own principle, they have their own dynamics. So it should be discussed separately. I disagree because I do believe that any event at the macro level will have some ramifications on the day-to-day life, including day-to-day life of people across the country. And because of that, it is a challenge for me because there are not many kind of a study who try to link the two here. So in a way, the book intention is try to show in a humble way how you link the macroeconomic issues and interregional inequality. So that is basically the background thinking behind the book. Now, as I said, the macro policy that I've been interested in is really monetary policies. So the first question is, what is really the bridge between monetary policy and regional development? One can think of a number of variables, potential variables, but the most direct one is credits. So in other words, whatever the money supply or any monetary policy, including interest rate policy, translate into credit allocation, that will be sort of affecting directly what happened at the regional level. Now, from the theoretical point of view, for a couple of decades, it has been known that monetary policies affects credit through many channels. I don't want to waste time here because I have only 20 minutes. A couple of channels, actually, how monetary policy affects credits. And then when it comes to the question, what does it mean in terms of regional credit allocation? Basically, it depends on the regional structure. So this has been sort of the standard practice for decades. So you analyze the monetary policy, the impact on credits, and then you allocate which regions will have more credit and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is what is known as the structural approach. In a way, monetary policy or money supply is exogenous. So what is endogenous is really what will be the translation of that into both national credit as well as regional allocation. But more recently, and I personally believe in the many developing countries, including Indonesia, it's really another approach that needs to sort of be considered very seriously, and that is what I call behavioral approach. To make it easy to understand, what's the difference between structural approach and the behavioral approach? In the behavioral approach, money supply is endogenous, not exogenous. So what determines the money supply at the regional level? It's the behavior of the local banks. Now, when it comes to behavior, it's so complex. One most important variables to reflect the behavior of the local banks is what is called the liquidity preference. to what extent local banks have the degree of liquidity preference. And to understand that, we cannot just collect the data of the liquidity preference, because the standard measure of the liquidity preference is usually credit over deposit ratio and so on. Sure, that is useful, but in order to really understand what is the real preference of the local banks, we need to go to those people, to those administrators, to those leadership of the local banks, and then interview them. So from there, then we can find out whether or not there is some degree of liquidity preference, or maybe they're more sort of leaning towards profitability, or maybe they're leaning towards solvability. This is the reasons why during the research, we conducted a number of field survey from Aceh, Sumatra Utara, all the way to Papua. So that is basically the thinking behind it. If we look at this chart, anything above, I don't know what it appears in your screen, but the color is something like orange color. That is the structural model. As I said earlier, money supply is exogenous, how it affects national, and then the regional credit determined by the regional structure, economic structure at the regional level. Now, the bottom one, the yellow color, that's the behavioral approach. As you can see, basically, what is happening at the region, which is reflected by the behavior of the local banks, that will determine the money supply as well as the credit. So one way to think about it is this. In the standard structural model, if, let's say, the total national credit is 100, and let's say that 100 has been distributed across 34 provinces in Indonesia, if one province get higher credit, then the other province have to have lower credit. That's the standard structural approach. But in the behavioral approach, that's not the case. If one region, for whatever reasons, sort of lead to higher credit because of the potential or any other reasons, it does not necessarily mean that there will be sacrifice of credit for the other region. That is the nature of the behavioral approach. So what this research is sort of applying is basically both. So we take into account both the structural approach and the behavioral approach. So I think that is sort of the background of what this research and the book is all about. Now let me jump into the sort of the big picture in terms of the message. What is the message of the book? In short, the message is the following. The interregional inequality in Indonesia is very big. By international standard, if we compare with comparable countries, we cannot compare Indonesia and, let's say, Malaysia, Thailand, because they are smaller countries. But compare Indonesia with India, with China, Mexico, Colombia, and so forth. If you measure the interregional inequality, so I'm not talking about inequality between income groups, but between regions, Indonesia is number one, the highest. That means we are the most unequal. Now, one can make all kinds of arguments. Look, Indonesia is the largest archipelago in the world, basically with what, 17,000 islands and so on. That makes it distinct, and that makes it difficult to equalize the development across region and so on. Whatever the reason, but that's a fact. Now, when we are measuring a set of indicators over time, the story is even worse. It's not only that Indonesia is the worst, but over time it's getting worse. So there is no sign of improvement in the interregional inequality. So the whole chapter in that book discussing about it, giving you sort of indicators, whether you are using the standard per capita GDP or per capita consumption, or which is more important, is the productivity. So even the productivity inequality between regions is pretty high. In fact, I remember it, the highest productivity compared to the lowest productivity is high as 15 times. So again, it's not only the level of inequality is high, but over time, it's getting worse. Now, what does that mean for monetary policy? When you implement macro policy, any macro policy actually, but today I'm focusing only on monetary policy. When you implement monetary policy in that kind of environment, it's almost likely that the effectiveness of that policy is lower. So the higher the inequality, the lower is the effectiveness of the macro policy, especially the monetary policies. So what the book is trying to demonstrate is to show through the model, through survey, field survey, that this is indeed the case. Now, in the case of Indonesia, what is very unique in the sense that, as I said earlier, we are the world's largest archipelago and so forth. Transportation matters a lot. If we look at, for example, bank credits, local credits by local banks, most of the credit allocated to two sectors. One is agriculture, the second is trade. You know, if you travel throughout Indonesia, the first thing you landed, if you fly, or you land it in the ship port, or if you drive or you take a train, whatever, the first thing you see in front of your eyes are trade activities. People are selling, open warung, open ruko, and selling anything. Those are trade activities. Millions of Indonesians throughout the country basically are operating in that sectors. Now, if we are relating that fact with the concept of patterns of development, indeed, Indonesia follows the so-called normal patterns of development, i.e., lowering the share of agriculture, increasing the share of manufacturing and services. Although in the case of manufacturing, we are not really increasing because of the, all kinds of problems, but that's different topics here. But services sector has been increasing. In fact, since 2015, the largest sector in terms of employment in Indonesia are services sector, much larger than agriculture sector. Now, within the services sector, the largest part is really trade sector. And within the trade sector, the largest employers are really retail trade, not wholesale trade, but the retail trade. So when I travel throughout the country, by the way, I thank Spins for facilitating all these travels, including, accompanying research assistants with me throughout Indonesia. When we travel, we immediately see there's so many people are involved in those kind of retail trade. So we do interview, we ask the local banks, and in this study, we classified local banks into 4 categories. That is the state banks, private banks, PPR, Bank Perkreditan Rakyat. I think the name changed now. Later on, Mas Tedy can explain about the new definitions of the PPR. And then Bank Syariah. So basically, we are asking them, what happened with those credits that they allocate? As I said, mostly to agriculture and trade. To my surprise, in fact, if I may just speak, because there are so many cases and some answers in different ways and so, but let me pick one sort of extreme example. And this happened in NTT, Nusa Tenggara Timur. One private bank, I cannot mention the name, but one big private bank in NTT told me that almost 100% of the credit that they allocated to the trade sector for the local traders are spent outside NTT. Now, where do they spend? Mostly in more developed regions, including Java. Okay? Because by definition, what is trade? Trade is something that you sell. But where do you get that something to sell? In the local area, you cannot get that product. because there is no manufacturing in those regions. So you have to import from somewhere. That means majority of the credit that the traders receive from the local banks will be spent outside. So from this simple example alone, even without looking at the model, you can see immediately that the more credit allocated outside Java, the more multipliers effect on Java, not outside Java. In fact, if we just look at a simple ratio, which is loan to deposit ratio, it's dramatic. If I can show you, if you look at the left chart, that's the loan deposit ratio. You can see it very dramatically different between Java and Luar Java. In Luar Java, it's almost more than 100%, meaning in Luar Java, more credits allocated than the deposit. In Java, is the opposite. Now, this is the dangers of just relying on data, because if we are just looking at this data, we may come to the conclusion that, oh, then the bank is contributing to the development of Luar Java, which is good for regional development. No, it's not. Precisely because the story I was telling you, even though the loan is greater than the deposit outside Java, but most of that loans are really spent in Java. And that explains why the inequality between regions in Indonesia, as I said earlier, is not only high, but basically also getting worse. And then there's another way to sort of justify or to verify whether this kind of asymmetry is really taking place. And that is by adopting the interregional multipliers. And indeed, we found exactly what we suspected. If we spend 100 in Java, there are some interregional multipliers for Luar Java. Let's call it alpha. So in other words, you spend 100 in Java, you generate multiplier alpha in Luar Java. Now, if you spend the same 100 in Luar Java, there will be also interregional multipliers for Java, call it beta. And it's clear from all the calculation, it shows that alpha is much greater than in beta. So that means the more developed sort of projects outside Java, the more benefit Java will gain benefit. Now, there are all kinds of story in terms of the mechanism, but that's really the story how the interregional inequality is not only bad, but it's getting worse over time. So overall, I know time is up here. Let me just jump into one sentence conclusion. Basically, what I found through this research is that monetary policy, if it is applied in an environment where the interregional inequality is bad, tends to be ineffective, and monetary policy itself, without taking into account the spatial dimension, will worsen the inequality. So you can imagine this is like vicious cycle. Monetary policy causing inequality, inequality causing monetary policy being ineffective. So the general message here, as I said, I'm focusing only on the monetary policy, but the general message here is that any macro policy, if they neglect the spatial dimensions of the story, it tends to be less effective and it can worsen the inequality, which is already high. Now, I indicated earlier that I just finished another book. It was last month. In fact, in that book, I show that the greater the interregional inequality, the lower is the national growth. Because I know nowadays, Indonesia, at least the government, is obsessed with maximizing the national growth. But it is shown that the greater the inequality between regions, the less likely you achieve higher growth. So, but that is different topic. My point here is that any macro policy, including monetary policy, must take into account the spatial dimension in such that the monetary policy can be designed that it will not only worsening the inequality, but it will be more effective. Maybe because of time constraint, why don't I stop here? And I would love to have the discussion about this, in a way, a little bit controversial topic. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pak Iwan, and thank you for keeping the time. I was just twiddling my thumbs, wondering whether I should interrupt you. But let me highlight one point that Pak Iwan mentioned, which is, yeah, the silo of monetary policy shouldn't be kept. And one variable linking monetary policy with regional development is credit. And with this segue, I would like to introduce Pak Tedy Alamsyah, our next speaker, the first of 5 panelists who will be giving a discussion on this book. So, Pak Tedy, I think if you are here, good morning, Pak Tedy Alamsyah.
Prof. Iwan, good evening, Prof. Iwan.
I think there's supposed to be something coming from the on Pak Tedy?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, I mean from the, yeah. So, okay, let me introduce Pak Tedy. Perhaps it will flash up. This is what I mean, yeah. Flash up in your screen. Pak Tedy is chair of PERBARINDO, and you may ask what is PERBARINDO. It is the Perhimpunan Bank Perkreditan Rakyat Indonesia, and Pak Tedy has a long history working with PERBARINDO, and in addition, he is also president director of PT BPR Danaku. Pak Tedy, the floor is yours. About 10 minutes, Pak Tedy.
Thank you very much, Ibu Lydia, for giving me time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, Prof. Iwan Jaya Azis. Good morning, Ibu Cecilia Aharum, Director of Bank Indonesia Institute. Of course, good morning, distinguished discussion. Profesor Dr. Bernadette Robiani, Profesor Sudarno Sumarto, Profesor Budy P. Resosudarmo, and Profesor Dr. Luky Wuryanto. And good morning, respected colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for the opportunity to participate as discussion for Professor Iwan's book. It is a great honor for the DPR industry, which represents less than 2% of the total asset of Indonesian banking industry, to be invited to contribute to this important discussion. Although our industry asset size is relatively small, BPR plays a significant role in serving micro and small enterprises across Indonesia. Around 2.5 years ago, Prof. Iwan and I had a very insightful discussion. During this conversation, he challenged me to think critically about the future of BPR industry. One of the main realities is that almost all BPR's priorities, business sustainability. Their primary key performance indicator is to maximize lending while maintaining profitability. However, achieving this objective requires improvement in the regulatory and operational environment. In Professor Iwan's book, my area of expertise focuses specifically on the BPR industry. As we can read in the book, Monetary Whisper Across Space, the results show that different banks have different needs. State-owned bank mainly focus on digitalization. Local government bank focus on governance and digitalization. However, BPR need stronger governance, more flexible regulation, and digital transformation. This tells us that one regulation cannot fit every type of bank. I fully agree that good corporate governance is essential. However, I would also like to emphasize another important issue. Less restrictive regulation should become one of the regulator's priorities. BPRs have a very different business model from commercial banks. Therefore, applying the same regulatory standard does not always produce effective outcome. In this case, why the regulation matters to understand why regulation matters, we first need to understand the characteristic of BPR customers. BPRs primarily serve micro and small enterprises, and this business have unique characteristic. First, many entrepreneurs become business owners not because they identify market opportunities or business opportunity, but because they have no other option for earning a living. Second, most businesses are owner-managed, meaning that one person is responsible for almost every aspect of the business. Third, business finance and household finance are often mixed together, making financial management more complicated. And finally, these businesses are highly vulnerable to change in family economic circumstances and regional economic condition. Even a small disruption can affect their ability to repay loan. That is refer also with the other book of Prof. Iwan Jaya Azis, Listen and Design. This characteristic distinguishes BPR customer from the corporate client typically served by commercial bank. This brings me to one practical example. Consider the implementation of the expected credit loss, or we can say CKP and requirement, which is based on International Financial Reporting Standard or IFRS. Under these frameworks, banks are required, BPR especially, to recognize higher credit loss provision when borrower began showing signs of repayment difficulties. However, when this standard is applied to micro and small enterprise borrowers, we should ask an important question, because that doesn't make sense. The same standard to micro and small entrepreneurs whose loan repayment is delayed by only few days due to the temporary cash flow. And last but not least, would you like the operator show my slide? Here the modeling system that shows gap between BPR purpose versus actual challenging. Why are BPR still facing many challenging? The biggest issue is lack of competence. There is BPR purpose versus actual challenging. The gap affect for critical areas of element: human capital, infrastructure, information, and customer, that mostly of customers are micro, small enterprise. Furthermore, many BPR are still transitioning for traditional banking operation to digital banking. And the last one is vision and mission should be aligned by all shareholders, which are policymaker, BPR owner, and also BPR management. To conclude, I would like to leave with three messages according to Prof. Iwan book, Monetary Whispers across space. First, BPR has different challenges from commercial bank. Second, strong organizational competence is the key to successful transformation. Third, good governance, digitalization, and loosening regulation must work together to the business model and customer characteristic of BPR. This illustrates why a more proportionate regulatory approach is needed for BPR. Because of our limited time, I cannot discuss every issue in detail. Instead, I hope this discussion raises curiosity among researchers, academic, policymakers, and regulators. Ultimate key message: good governance is essential, but regulation must also proportionate to the business model and customer characteristics of BPR. Thank you very much for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Pak Tedy. And it's very good that you raise these characteristics of BPR and of course of activities in the regions, industrial and other activities in the region. And one aim of FKP is also to let decision makers, let industry practitioners, and also academics to meet together. Hopefully this becomes a meeting room, and I invite academics, researchers to liaise or to collaborate with Pak Tedy to research more on this aspect of credit provision at the regional level. With that, thank you, Pak Tedy, and I would like to introduce our next panelists from this list of 5 distinguished panelists. I've posted the list in the chat box, so you can follow along. We will have 5 panelists. And as I mentioned, our next panelist is Professor Bernadette Robiani. Ibu Bernadette, I believe, is joining us from Palembang. She is a great friend of Forum Kajian Pembangunan and a great supporter of Forum Kajian Pembangunan. She is currently also the Vice Rector of Universitas Sriwijaya. Thank you, Ibu, for joining us this morning, and please give your discussion about 10 minutes. Silakan, Ibu.
Thank you, Lydia. Good evening, Prof. Iwan, and then good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank Bank Indonesia for giving me the opportunity to join to share some ideas, some comments to the book of Prof. Iwan. And then I also would like to thanks to Prof. Iwan Jaya Azis for introducing and then reminding us through this book, Monetary Whisper Across Space. In my opinion, this book is an important reference for us in the field of economics, especially in studying inequality. There are 2 points that caught my attention while reading this book. The first one is about the inequality. There is an increasing inequality in Indonesia using macro measures that you mentioned in the book. And then the second one, the implementation of monetary instruments in regions with different or unexpected results, especially between Java region and then outside Java region. I think there are 2 things that we need to consider about the first about the regional characteristics, which is related to the natural resources, human resources, infrastructure, and regional policy. And then I think it will influence the economic development of those regions. And then further, it will influence the inequality. And then the second thing about the micro factors, I think we cannot ignore how the culture of the one region can influence the productivity in that region. And then I think we can add these variables in our next research for the complete of the research. And then about the monetary implementation of the monetary policy, Prof. Iwan, we have our research in 2019 on small industry in Southern Sumatra, includes South Sumatra, Province Lampung, and then Bangka Belitung, with access to banking as one of the variables. So one of our variables is the access to banking. We found that most companies in the small industry do not utilize bank funding due to inability to meet banking requirements. They prefer to obtain funding outside of bank. I think this is important. And then in this for this result, I think except the monetary office, I think the role of local government is very important to educate and then to bridge the industry with the bank. Issue of sustainability of raw material and then about the market are part of the problem for the small industry. The raw material, somehow they must get it from the other regions. And then for the market, most of them, they don't know how to market their product abroad. So this is, I think this is not only the duty of the local government, but also needs the help, from the bank in the local area. And then I think this is the important thing. Another thing that also we need to consider, and then about how the monetary policy affect the to minimize the inequality is the integration between local government and then the central government, and then means that the policy to minimize the inequality must be integrated and it cannot stand alone. Policy implementation can occur simultaneously, and then it really needs the commitment of the local government and also the central government. I think this is all from me, Lydia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Bernadette. And I think it links to Pak Tedy's presentation on credit, and you have mentioned the activities at the regional level that needs to be supported in terms of funding, but taking into account the characteristics at the regional level and also the need for close collaboration between central and local governments. Thank you, Ibu Bernadette. Our third panelist is Dr. Sudarno Sumarto. Good morning, Pak Darno. Are you joining us from Semarang, Pak?
Yes, I am, Lydia. Thank you.
Good morning. And everyone, you can see Pak Sudarno's, or we call him Pak Darno's CV in your monitor. But one thing that is not there, and I would like to highlight this because this is a point of great pride for all of us economists, is Pak Sudarno is one of the most highly cited economists from Indonesia. He is the most cited economist in Indonesia, and he is, of course, a senior research fellow at SMERU Research Institute and holds various illustrious positions at various research institutes around the world. So, Pak Darno, it's 10 minutes, and the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for your kind and generous introduction. It's good to see you again, Mas Iwan, Prof. Iwan Azis. Greeting from our children, Adrian and Jessica, your student. So I would like to use my 10 minutes. Please allow me to share screen, which basically some of them are already highlighted by Professor Iwan Azis himself, actually, but please allow me to repeat some of the point that he already highlighted. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, selamat siang teman-teman di Canberra, Prof. Budy, dan tentu Mas Iwan di Cornell. Also, all of panelists, very grateful to be with such a distinguished panelists, which we already know who they are, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real pleasure to be part of this very important discussion. And of course, first of all, I would like to thank Ibu Sisil from the Bank Indonesia Institute, good friend who has been very supportive to me also in sharing my research in the past, and also colleague from Indonesia Project, Prof. Budy dan Lydia tentunya for inviting me to launch the book for Professor Iwan Azis, Monetary Whisper Across Space. It's a very wonderfully cosmic title. This is like, Star Wars, the work that I believe is serve as a timely and important contribution to our understanding about Indonesia. Some of them are already highlighted by Prof. Iwan himself, Pak Alamsyah, and also Ibu Bernadette. Let me begin by the very simple question that this is the passion that Professor Iwan already started thinking about it 30 years ago. I remember vividly when I was a young researcher at CPIS, he gave us a lecture about the importance of regional economy. He was a young graduate from Cornell, top school, and then that's actually made me fall in love a bit about regional economics. And then I went to Professor Late Arshad, but I think I got accepted at Cornell. What do you think if I go to Cornell? And this is something like this. This is confession that I never told Pas Ilban. So we already have Iwan Azis there, and it's also very mathematical. So as if he undermined, I don't know mathematics. So I think you go to Vanderbilt, that's a better development economics. That was the story, true genuine story I had when I was a young researcher at CPIS. I got accepted at Cornell too, and I ended up went to Cornell. So that is the basic question. And most of you probably will say it's one. The answer is one. One currency, one central bank, and one policy interest rate. But after reading Mas Iwan Azis, I think you will have more nuanced answer about this one. But Indonesia is not one. It's a very heterogeneous country. This is already proven by my research during early of crisis with Land Pritchard, with many friends, that there's very striking issue in Indonesia. And this is the central issue of the book. And what makes it so interesting is how Mas Iwan bring the theory, very rich theory from the older Arshad, Walter Arshad. I know his professor who love him very much, and Mas Budy, until the latest development of endogenous growth theory, and then also Krugman on agglomeration. And that is what this insight matters to understanding Indonesia better. So, but I should confess that I'm not the monetary economist. Mas Iwan knows it, Bank Indonesia knows it. My work for the last 30 years has focused mainly on poverty and social protection, asking who is the poor and why are the poor and where they are, and what policy that we can introduce to help them out of poverty. So when the Bank Institute, Posisil through Ibu Fatia sent me the manuscript, I assume I was about to read about monetary transmission. Instead, I found a book about more than that, about inequality, about geography, ultimately about Indonesia's development. And if I may, to summarize a bit, this was also presented in Professor Iwan first grab. Monetary policy does not travel across Indonesia evenly. Geography shapes how monetary policy is transmitted, while monetary policy can, in turn, reinforce or reduce regional inequality. As an empirical development economist, I find this framework both compelling and also thought-provoking. In fact, reading chapter 5 made me eager to go deeper of doing future research. Mas Iwan gave us a nice baseline, and it's naturally open up rich avenue for future research, such as looking not just at the level of regional credit, but also its spread across region and using lag control to help tease apart these complex predictive pathways in his regression of the beta coefficient. But at the same time, because the relationship run in both direction, Prof. Iwan mentioned that nicely, it raises an important empirical challenge. How do we disentangle cause from effect? That, I think, is one of the exciting research agenda that this book open for future generation or even Iwan himself. So this book asks us to look at Indonesia through different lens, not one economy, but in many regional economies sharing one currency. And three stand out for reading the book. I hope this is not misrepresenting Prof. Iwan. The first one is that national growth alone has not closed gap. Instead, it has frequently pushed workers toward lower productivity in formal jobs. Mas Iwan traveled a lot. He saw after landing in Papua or somewhere in Lombok, probably what he saw is people selling fruit, vegetable across the street. So actually this structural transformation did not follow with equal productivity within Java and off Java. The second note is that investment out Java create value, but as Pak Iwan mentioned, that it also back to Java. Where it happened matters just as how much it invested. This is critically important that people didn't notice in the past. And finally, this regional equality does not just build, airport or toll road. What does it mean? Does it mean that we have to stop investing in infrastructure? Pak Iwan said clearly in the book, not at all. But what we need to think is that we need to complement those investment input with institution, human capital, and social capital. He didn't mention in his presentation, but the book specifically again and again mentioned about this institution, the importance of that one. I think it's just being nice and being polite, not to be more promising of taking everything. Okay, next, here is already presented by Prof. Iwan. I'm not going to go through it, but the bottom line of this graph, by reading everything, is just liquidity status, loan to deposit, even though we don't need to put too much point on loan to deposit, but it matters a lot. Nationally, it's only about 87%, but if you look at Java of Java, it's, differ very significantly. And the story of this one is very clear, that the bank survey shows that what he already mentioned is that the capital invested off Java actually went back to Java because of this, value chains that created by firm in Java. Even though there are some note from me, but probably they also created some value on that local because after all, they also do some of the services. So this is issue of legal reference that Pak Iwan mentioned. So when you see Indonesia this way, it is difficult to unseen it, and that is critically important. This pattern is where Mas Iwan's work resonates strongly with my research. For years, I've been with my colleague at SMERU and also at the NB2K try to understand why I'm not using province, but using district consistently some districts consistently outperform others. Look at this slide. If you look at poverty reduction, district with active poverty reduction, which I call it this institution, for 3 more years managed to reduce poverty almost twice as fast. And they did it within the exact same budget involved, despite having similar fiscal resources. This is also a paper published by ANU, Mas Budy Indonesia Project. In education, this is the recent study with idea with Lance Pitchett, Harvard Kennedy School and Oxford Daphne, found that certain districts improve student learning very nicely. This is the PISA score type of that one. People sometimes didn't understand about this one. Indonesia is very heterogeneous in terms of the school student learning. Some districts are doing relatively well, Yogyakarta, and then Ujung Pandang, and then also Sumatra, Again, differences were done, it was driven by institutional capability, local leadership, and the social capital that enable school and communities to cooperate effectively. Different sector, different data, and entirely different method, yet structuralism is identical. So the point here is capital create possibilities. It is institution and social capital that ultimately determine whether those possibilities transform into actual opportunities. Pak Iwan mentioned several times in the book about this institution here and there. It's a challenge to quantify it in the future. That's the next research idea. So let me conclude. Last slide, Lydia. I think I didn't spend that much time. So why does this matter so urgently? Prof. Iwan mentioned that Indonesia is now actively pursuing a highly ambitious development agenda called Asta Cita, 8% growth, hilirisasi, self-sufficiency, that kind of stuff. The foundational challenge is no longer simply how do we grow faster? I've been saying this all along. People didn't seem to understand about this, so I'm sorry. But it is how do we ensure that every single region can participate in and benefit from that growth? This book naturally invites us to ask three simple questions. Growth of what? Growth where? And growth for whom? So this was not mentioned by Prof. Iwan on the household inequality, but mostly regional. But that's also resonated about inequality across household. We can tell you more about that finally. So let me end my note today with, not with answer, but with these three questions from the room and also from Iwan. The first question is, if monetary transmission is geographically uneven, should our central bank policy, Ibu Cecil and the team, the policy tool become more space differentiated and geographically sensitive? Or still one-size-fits-all policy? I think Bu Cecil at the beginning mentioned that too. And second one, this is the complaint of Mas Iwan since I first saw him from Cornell when I was still director of SMERU in Menteng. After decentralization, actually inequality did not improve, even worsen. So the question is very critical. If regional inequality stubbornly persists, should we rethink of fiscal re-centralization or focus heavily on strengthening local institution capacity? This is a trap question, but it's important for us to understand this better. And finally, if we all know that Indonesia is not one size fits all, why do we still stubbornly analyze Indonesia as thought it was one single monolithic market? What keeps us from breaking this habit? And the final sentence I would like to leave from this book is, geography is not a footnote to monetary policy. It is the price of admission to growth that is not only faster, but also genuinely shared across region and across household. Again, selamat and congratulations, Prof. Iwan. Excellent book. This is a book is much more than a book about monetary economics. It is a vital to new way of seeing Indonesia. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Darno, and I love that, what you say about geography shaping whether capital reinforces regional inequality or creates opportunities. I think for those who think that this book is only about monetary policy, this is a fantastic way to describe it. This is more than just about monetary policy, but about how capital shapes a development. So it's fantastic that everyone's been on time. So I would like, before I introduce the next panelist, I would like to remind everyone you can give a comment or ask a question, and you can write it in the Q&A box, or you can use the raise hand feature so that we can unmute you and you can ask your question directly. And maybe I should mention this because it wasn't mentioned earlier. We have 3 books available for those with giving the most thoughtful questions. So 3 books up for grabs. Silakan. Kalau mau bertanya juga dalam bahasa Indonesia bisa. Silakan tuliskan di kolom Q&A, bukan chat ya, Q&A, atau gunakan fitur raise hand. Alright, so our next speaker is Dr. Luky Eko Wuryanto, or we call him Pak Eko. I've known Pak Eko from a long time while he was at Papanas. Maybe Pak Eko doesn't remember me. I was just fresh out of undergraduate S1. And Pak Eko is currently director at Asian Infrastructure, Vice President, I'm sorry, Pak, I didn't mean to demote you. Vice President of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, which is based in Beijing, I believe. Are you joining us from Beijing, Pak Eko?
No, from Jakarta.
Okay. Baik, so Pak Eko, the same as the others, the time is yours for about 10 minutes. Silakan, Pak.
Okay, I will do my best. Thank you very much, Lydia. And good morning, Assalamualaikum, my fellow discussants. Selamat malam, Mas Iwan. Let me just begin with just small talks about him that I think I need to show that we have been together for, or known him for about more than 3 years, 30 years actually. First as a name, of course, since he was a very young and prominent scientist. And it's actually also my other who introduced me to what is exactly the realm of regional science. And then finally, I have a chance to be close with him because during my study time in Cornell, back in 1993, 1996. He was really just a mentor, a professor, as well as a warm friend, and also very proud because he's the only fellow Indonesian who sits in the faculty member. It's a bit of funny story because he once told me that during one of the dinner arranged by him, invites the Honorable Professor Amin Salim, who happens to visit him into Cornell. He called him science. So in the front of Walter Isaac, it's actually the father of regions. I always laugh that story. And it's actually both of those persons, in fact, both of those persons, in fact, doing research together and always spend the private musical performance with Professor Isaac play piano and Iwan plays guitars. Okay, so congratulations, Mas Iwan. I think this book, although maybe you only sees this as one of the milestones that you have reached, but I think this is a truly seminal book, truly cementing your status as the son of regional science. So let me see how I contextualize this book. I have 13 points. So I do have time to manage during around nine minutes that I have. Okay, what has been discussed and presented in this book is indeed a truly pioneering works in 2 areas I see. First, the work covers not only deep comprehension in the evolutions of economic theories and principles in servicing a better support to formulate effective policies for reaching regional target, but also pinpointing their deficiency if they leave behind the relationship to the space. Throughout the book, the analysis have shown its precise dissections, the relationship between economic factors, or in this case, more specifically monetary indicators, and the space is not merely a chance or opportunistic. It provides convincing proof that economic factors and monetary territory is not neutral to space due to the existence of the multiple differences in regional economics, social as well as cultural conditions. The impacts of the above relationship is apparent and could produce strictly different results. At the same time, it could be either resulting in opposing impacts, one is positive, symbiotic, or constructive in certain regions, and negative or destructive impacts in some other regions. From a macroeconomic point of view, as a result, the effectiveness of the national macroeconomic policy would then become less, despite the aggregate numbers may register probably very slight or insignificant reductions. So the conclusion is that using only national number or target definitely will be misleading. On the second area, from his deep knowledge in regional science, Professor Iwan then introduced the use of centripetal and centrifugal force as an analogy of concentration and dispersions that shapes the tone and the quality of regional economic differences. It is unfortunate that for Indonesia, the situations of interregional differences become alarming due to the already stark difference in economic stages between Java and outside Java. Neglecting this gap in discussing the national policy formulations will be misleadingly disastrous. I will further discuss this later on these issues, but for now, let me say that this is really a pioneering piece of work that is presented in the book. From the quantitative works, the depth and the amount of analysis is staggering, probably equivalent to at least 10 dissertations, if not more. On this note, allow me to extend my sincere gratitude to Bank Indonesia, especially Bank Indonesia Institute, to facilitate and support the deliberations of this invaluable book. Actually, we should acknowledge the BI role is not only limited to that, presenting a transparency and ultimate analysis that apparently picturing the indications of a grim picture for Indonesia, if danger is considered to be a very strong word, is highly appreciated. I'm a firm believer that this will serve effectively as a wake-up call, or probably red alert notice to many scientists and decision makers, not only for just on the policy formulations, but we are usually very good at, but on also in the policy executions, and more importantly, its monitoring and evaluation prudence. So for those who dedicated their professional life to be regional scientists like Professor Iwan, this book has presented you a master key, or better yet, a golden roadmap of where of the location of the existing research area should be directed toward. So based on the analysis on the entire book, it is confirmed that beyond the doubt that the effectiveness of the national policy, including economic policy and more specifically monetary policy, which is generally designed to maximize growth and price stability, as demonstrated to be exacerbated to interregional inequality. Persistently, interregional inequality continues to rise. And interestingly, though, the book also clearly stated that the culprit is not obviously solely belong to the monetary policy or BI alone. Through the descriptions, especially in chapter 5 and 6, it is apparent that BI, empowered by its mandate and supported by 34 regional offices, has done quite a lot in facilitating regional economic activities. It is indeed necessary, but obviously not close to sufficient. Many facets of this issue are outside BI mandate and capabilities, as pointed out in the book. To tackle of the heart of the issues, there are many other non-monetary intertwining factors that involve, which must be taken also into account. It means it should be the task of the whole government in totality. So based on my experience as a government official, there are flaws in the government policy deliberations. Maybe I'm also responsible partially on that. To simplify things, we could categorize the cause into two categories. First, it stemmed originally from the quality of the existing programs of policy. Several policies could be cited, for instance, decentralization, that is clearly a lack of convictions and commitment, where it is clearly the way forward to improve the governance, as well as the inclusions of the involvement of the social capital. But it's not been yet really convincingly executed. My former boss in Bappenas back in the 90s used to say, regional development is not only development in the regions. Factors that need to be considered must not only the resulting impact within one district or provinces, but also need to include the impact of how the district and the provinces will then develop their relationships with their neighbors. Those are where the centripetal and centrifugal force come into play. Dismissing the informations will as if we are not only omitting probably 30 or 40% of the information resulted from the economic value created, but more importantly, it's also lose the proper directions where should the policy improvement be directed. So I agree with the statement in the book that the allocation of national infrastructure investment are many times not compatible with the social capital and competitive local producer. In many of the development assistance, one of the development economic theories that I know, a proper order of development should be aimed first to the social and basic needs approach before the economic approach. Hence, the allocation for social and basic infrastructure like water, electricity, education may be related, should be higher than those economic infrastructure, for example, roads and ports at the earlier periods. This is a simple logic, as it will prepare much better the impacted populations before they embark into the wider competitions. Secondly, it stems from the lack of the or absence of efforts to improve the advancement of superstructure. What I call the superstructure is actually, as also the Sudarno has mentioned, institutional development, predictable and transparent rule of law, as well as a police power or law enforcement. The improvement of this aspect is so lag behind in the evolutions of social and economic development for at least 10 years. Many of the business process, including the government services delivery, has not been properly changed to commensurate the more complex and transparent needs of operations. So, two more points. There are no consistent strategic national industry development policies that also fall into this category. And last but not least, there is no strong strategic targeted regional policies as well. I'm a firm believer that the lack of these two important policies may be contributed to the fact that the trade sector, as Mas Iwan has also been describing before, has been so dominating in the economic structure and transformations. Of course, this place is non-exhaustive and should be several other policies could be pinpointed. I also totally agree that it is stated in the very last paragraph of the book, says the problem of the interregional inequality in Indonesia have been undermined too long, creating a cynical and acrimonious atmosphere among analysts, policymakers, and communities. This problem seems to be viewed only as after the fact, not considered as the important enough to be predicted or properly maneuvered. I also agree that this problem should not need to be openly laid out on the table and taken more seriously, but considering the depth and the seriousness of the issues, which is seemingly moving toward regional polarizations, I guess you have mentioned before, Mas Iwan, before, long time ago, it definitely needs more political affirmative actions or programs, rather than only an ordinary one. So last point. As a last note, let me say this briefly. Currently, we have this lightning fast development of IT, IoT, AI globally. This development has huge potential transparency control if you could integrate it into government policy or program. In fact, it has huge potential to modernize public administrations, improve service delivery, and also enhance decision-making process, not to mention the transparency as well. We have witnessed their successfulness in application in many instances, at globally, also at locally. Using the integrated IT system into the implementations of policy or program has unique additional feature as well. It adds the dimension of control from practically the whole impacted society or individual who has concerns. This is the case where the inclusions could be pushed into maximum, which is in turn will benefit and increase the important roles of local social capital, which in this book has been repeatedly mentioned. While internet connectivity is prerequisite and essential, I bet its government budget allocation for the related infrastructure investment would have been well justified, since it will also have other positive impacts for education and health programs. Thank you very much for it. I'm so sorry if I passed your timing, Lydia. Thank you very much, Mas Iwan and other participants. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Pak Eko. And it's curious that you had mentioned about the quality of policy. And I don't know if everyone else missed that, but Pak Eko said maybe he played a role in that. But this is something that we continue to reflect, right? And it's not because of finding who is responsible, but to improve policy going forward. Thank you, Pak Eko. And maybe I mentioned that Pak Eko is probably one of two Cornell Mafia that we have here. Our next speaker is Professor Budy Resosudarmo from the Australian National University. He is also head of the ANU Indonesia project, and of course means that he's my boss. So Pak Budy, the second one of the Cornell Mafia in this room, or perhaps I think there are others in the room joining as attendee. I noticed there is Pak Natapong. Hello, welcome, Pak. Pak Budy, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Lydia, for the opportunity. First of all, I would like to congratulate Mas Iwan for another excellent book. This one is really good, and this is really not many could write this book, because many economists is either macroeconomists or microeconomists, but you have this capability to link macro and micro at the same time. I also would like to thank BI Institute for the opportunity to be a discussion in this book. And I also always happy to be in the same panel with old friend, Mas Sudarno, Pak Eko, Bu Bernadette, and a new friend, Pak Tedy. I know Lydia for a long time. So before I start my comment, I would like to remind everybody that Mas Iwan and me has at least two similarities. And this is probably the same with Mas Sudarno and Mas Eko. We both economists, and also we used to play tennis a lot. So in Ithaca, I spent many of days, which is enjoyable, playing tennis with Mas Iwan and Pak Eko. And I should say to everyone that Mas Iwan long forehand shot is very dangerous. It is a half spin, very strong, flat, and if you are not careful, you're going to miss it. It's so fast. Number one, it's so fast, so it doesn't give us much time to react. So yes, during my study in Cornell, I study economics. Yes, it is hard, but we can handle it. But the one that I cannot handle is this Mas Iwan forehand long shot. Yeah, and for sure, I can ensure everybody that Mas Iwan is a better tennis player than me. Yeah. All right. So let's go to the real one. Let me share my slide. So while others talk a lot on the implementation, all right. So can everybody see my slide properly? All right.
Yes.
So okay. Okay. How to do this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
better.
That's better. All right. So I would like to discuss in the conceptual that taken by Mas Iwan in writing this book. The main argument, as I understand, I simply and Mas Iwan has mentioned it as well as Sudarno and Pak Eko, is monetary and interregional inequality are not separate domain. Yeah. While conventional macro often assume that, but this book trying to say that there are two-way relationships that significant influence monetary policy and interregional inequality. So national policy, although we expect its work as aggregate economy, but it has heterogeneous regional effects that can widen the gap between regions, particularly Java and non-Java. This book talks a lot about that. And this widening gap is actually degrade the effectiveness of monetary policy itself. Also, it's creating a cycle. Things are getting worse. So Mas Iwan talked about that basically in his 20 minutes. All right. So the main analytic that I took from this book is acknowledging space within our analysis. Yeah, exposure to national shock. This is the exposure, not the national shock or not the monetary, but the exposure to each region of a single policy is not uniform across region. The other issue is there is a pre-existing interregional equality in terms of the way that the production actually conducted. I mean, the aggregate policies, yeah, if we simply looking at the aggregate number, will not produce the same thing as if we actually taking account the heterogeneous exposure of the policy across region and the pre-existing condition of the region. When you taking into account, those two will produce different results. Yeah. So and in the model, yeah, we usually basically trying to model the fact that policy transmission from national to region is filtered differently, and a lot of this is using the term transport cost. But when I say transport cost, it doesn't always mean the transport, but the transmission, probably I should say the transmission cost through region, make it, yeah, a single national policy is actually exposed differently across regions. So that is the main thing. And then the fact that there is pre-existing inequality, that is the second thing. But when we start acknowledging space, that is the first differences between those who actually acknowledge space and the conventional economics. Yeah. So that I will come back to this issue, how complicated when we're trying to actually model this transmission cost for Indonesia. So the strength of this book is the mixed method that Mas Iwan taken, which is a quantitative model and then the qualitative bank survey, which is going to the field, and it can actually check how this different heterogeneities of a single policies in its region, and also could check some other consistency in terms of data and behavior. The second aspect that this book is very strong is it is policy oriented, grounded, and it is based on a field survey, yeah, rather than just pure secondary statistics that most macroeconomists are doing, yeah. The analytic, yeah, while sometimes is informal, effective to convey the point or what the author would like to mention. So this book has, I thought this has a significant strength in this aspect. Now, there are 5 comments that I would like to argue that this book has not been completed or could be challenged. So number 1 is on this puzzle, how actually a monetary policy is transmit. Yeah. So the imagination of goods and services when it is transmit, it is transport cost. Yeah. But sometimes, but when we look at monetary policy, when the central bank set up a credit rate, how exactly those transmission to the region could be different. We feel it will be different because the way that they react actually differently, as you mentioned about how they actually doing the credit. But the explanation on this transmission, differences, heterogeneities in transmission, when it is come to monetary policy, has to be more explicit in the book. Because the reaction can come from 2 ways. One is the heterogeneous transmission, but also the heterogeneities of endowment. And for a lot of this, when we talk about spatial economics, they talk a lot is the first one, the fact that transmission actually a single policy can transmit differently. Yeah, so that's number 1. The second is that when we look at Indonesia physically, yeah, and many of this spatial economics theory that come with a transport cost modeling developed in a large continent area such as US, Europe, yeah. But Indonesia is an archipelago, yeah, in which one single unit cost, which is easily to model, and so the transport cost is the unit cost multiplied by the distance, not easily implemented in Indonesia because some regions are actually having a sea boundary, And sea boundary is unpredictable. Even a very close distance could be very difficult. Yeah. So how exactly variation that this transport cost will be adapted, and what is the story of those things, as actually in my mind has not been dig. So Mas Iwan showed the implication, but exactly the story, the mechanism is not yet being dig quite deep. So we understand exactly this transmission issue and whether a model within the existing economy can be implemented. The three comments are more minor. Number one is that the sample of the field surface seems to be relatively limited, 2 in Sumatra and 3 in Eastern Indonesia. It seems to me missing Sulawesi and Kalimantan, whether that sample could be used to generalize what's happening in Indonesia is the question to be answered because Sulawesi and Kalimantan might tell a different story as well. The third aspect, such as this issue is Indonesia only issue, it is really questionable. More international comparison is probably needed across archipelagic countries such as Philippines, what happened in the Philippines. There are also other developed large countries such as Brazil, Mexico, and India, whether this is also an issue and how they handle it, probably a good lesson learned for us. Now, finally, this one I'm not really sure, but the argument that there is a cycling over here make it difficult to identify causality. Yeah. So because also the inequality costs ineffective, heterogeneous, ineffective monetary policies is actually creating this endogeneity that when we're trying to explain and when we're trying to predict, it is problematic. So there are the 5 conceptual issues that I would like to raise. Maybe I'm not exactly perfect in explaining it, but hopefully others could understand better. And again, finally, congratulate to Mas Iwan for another excellent book, and looking forward to see the other book that has been ready and going to be published this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Budy. And that concludes the 5 discussants. And on behalf of Bank Indonesia Institute and also Forum Kajian Pembangunan, we thank all 5 discussants. And hope you can stick around for the Q&A session, but we would understand if you are unable to stick around. So thank you, Pak Budy, and thank you to all 5 discussant, Bapak Tedy Alamsyah, Ibu Bernadette Robiani, Bapak Sudarno Sumarto, Pak Eko, dan Pak Budy. So next we will go. Again, thank you to all discussants. So very exciting webinar. It's not the usual sleepy FKP webinar today. All right, so let's go into the Q&A, and I have more than 225 people in this room and 14 questions now. Hopefully we can get through a lot of them. Let me ask the first questions. The first questions, I will group them together to Pak Iwan. Pak Iwan, Pak Ross McLeod doesn't seem to be convinced about the effect of the money between growth in outside Java and in NTT. You can see in the questions box, but let me read it, summarize it. When NTT buys good from Java to sell locally, money shifts from NTT to Java, but NTT needs to import goods and must sell some. And the net impact, Pak Ross believes, is zero and no consequence for regional inequality. So, Pak Iwan, perhaps you can address this question from Pak Ross McLeod. But before that, let me also raise questions from Pak Jilal Mardani, Pak Inka Yuskiantoro, and Pak Radiskus Prihanto at Director General of the Perimbangan Perimbangan Keuangan, so fiscal okay, so I'll think about the translation, but they all raised the issue about fiscal decentralization. Pak Jilal and Pak Radiskus Prihanto raised how we can make fiscal decentralization more effective. On the other hand, Pak Inka Yuskiantoro asked whether Indonesia should actually go the other way, which is fiscal re-centralization. So between making fiscal decentralization more effective, or on the other hand, do we need fiscal re-centralization? So those are, I guess, the two threads of questions. First from Pak Ross, who is not convinced about the impact of the trade on development, inequality, and also on the fiscal decentralization or re-centralization.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Lydia. And let me, should I respond to the five commentators before, or I just jump into the questions, the last three questions that you mentioned?
Yes. I will try to summarize them, group them together, Pak, so that you don't have to sift through the Q&A box.
Okay, and what time I have? How long I have time?
I think we have the Q&As until 11:30. We can move a bit until 11:40 because we started late. So perhaps we can start with these 4 questions, I guess. From
okay, all right.
Four different people raising similar issues. Yeah.
Okay, in that case, let me jump into the last 3 or 4 questions that you mentioned here. First, from Ross, I mean, this is expected because if Ross is convinced, that is very unusual. So this is very useful that Ross is not convinced. Thanks, Ross, for asking that. Here is the point. I agree if, for example, the activities in NTT, well, actually it's all Eastern Indonesia, but let's use the case of NTT. If the credits allocated to activities, whether it's trade or non-trade in NTT, so what? It will generate some multipliers, some economic activities in NTT. But I mentioned earlier, since majority of the credit goes to trade, especially both the wholesale and retail trade, then those activities requires goods to sell, and most of the goods are not produced locally. So this is the key point, Ross. The key point is that many of the less developed regions, especially in Eastern Indonesia, do not have production capacity. And this is the reasons why one of the sort of policy recommendation, if I may wish to say that, is really to strengthen the effectiveness of raising the productive capacity at the regional level.
We'll still have yeah.
To hear something?
Okay. Yeah.
Did I hear
Coming from
somewhere?
Pak Budy. It's coming
Oh,
from
I
Pak
see.
Budy.
Okay.
It's okay.
So okay. So if the credits going to the local activities, sure, I agree it will not affect into regional development because it doesn't matter whether it's activities in trade or in non-trade and so on. But the problem is that credits does not increase the production capacity. And that is the key point, I think. And that is the reasons why, as I indicated earlier, the inequality between regions is not only high by international standard, but it's getting worse. Just to give you an idea, if we are just using the per capita consumption, because I don't like per capita GDP actually, because GDP is more production, but per capita consumption, the gap is more than 100 times between DKI Jakarta and NTT, for example. In terms of productivity, the same thing, the gap is very high. And what concerns me is that it's not only high, it's getting worse. So, of course, I'm not claiming that that is because of the monetary policy or macro policy neglecting regional spatial dimension. Of course, there are many other things, and this is where I thanks the reminders from other commentators, including Echo and uh, other commentators earlier, that decentralization it's another factor. Now, commenting on the decentralization, because there is a question from Mas Jilal, I think it's about fiscal decentralization, how to make it more effective. I think the story is very classical. It's a local capture. If anything, the problem with Indonesia decentralization is local capture. I don't need to elaborate further. Anytime there is a pilkada, there's always local capture. And the first thing, once the pilkada is over, the first thing most of the local leaders, I'm not saying all, but most of the local leaders think is not really the welfare of the society, but how to repay all those contributes to the, to the winning of the election and so forth. So the story of local capture is widespread, and I think it has been studied by many political scientists about that. So fiscal decentralization, I disagree, and this is I'm jumping to Inca point. I disagree to centralize the fiscal sort of allocation, because when you do that, in fact, I remember about 30 years ago, what I and some colleagues, including Hal Hill, actually, when we wrote for the first time about regional development in Indonesia, one of the major conclusions at that time is that Indonesia has been much too centralized, but it doesn't mean that we have to do sort of jumping from highly centralized to highly decentralized, like what happened in the year of 2000. We have to do in stages. And what is the key during that stages? The key is really human capital. One of the major reasons why decentralization failed in Indonesia, because of the capacity of the local official, including local leaders. And when I'm talking about capacity, I'm not only talking about their skill, about that, no, but many things. So the human resource is really the key why the decentralization policy failed. I know it's easy to jump to the conclusion, well, since fiscal decentralization lead to worsening condition, why don't we go back to fiscal centralization? I disagree with that. So I think it's really, we have to need to find what are really the key factors that leads to the failures of the decentralization rather than going back to the centralized system. So that's the point. But let me go back to, because I noticed there are a couple of very important sort of comment from the previous discussions. So rather than going one by one, let me sort of trying to summarize what is the essence of the question or inquiry from some of the commentators here. I think Mas Sudarno is correct. I really try to focus on the important institution. And this is where my first book, which is the Periphery and Small Ones Matter, I elaborated about that. So I'm afraid that I do not have time to elaborate more in this third book. But Mas Sudarno, if I may suggest you go to the first book, then I discuss a lot about the role of the institution, about collective actions and so forth, because that is another key of the success of the regional development, actually. And the second point, I think it's what Budy raised, and that is excellent point. And that is something about methodology. And that leads to my book that has been finished. Actually, let me criticize my own work in this book in terms of methodology. At least two I can mention what to criticize. Number one is that I'm using panel data, and yet I do not take into account the element of spatial dependency or spatial spillover. What happened in Maluku may have impact on Maluku Utara. What happened in Kalimantan Barat may have some impact on Kalimantan Timur. Here, in this model, I neglect that. And this is the reasons why in the book that I just completed last month, we took into account that by adopting the spatial econometric, spatial Durbin model, basically. The second one is what Budy also questioned about the causality here. And we all know one of the common sort of problems with any econometric model like this is really the endogeneity problem. Okay, and one of, not the only one, but one of the approach to deal with that is by adopting instrumental variables. Now, we all know that it's easy to say the importance of instrumental variables, but it's not easy to find one. And this is the reasons why in the book that I just finished last month, I also introduced in the SDM, in the spatial Durbin model, the role of the instrumental variables. So basically, two things. One is the spatial dependency between region and the endogeneity problems. So that I sort of consider as the weakness of the approach that I use in this model. However, having said that, notice that that model, that regression model that I use with this mixed model, the goal is not really to find a full-fledged model for regional credit. No, the goal is really to demonstrate what I hypothesize, and that is interregional inequality matters in terms of the impact of national monetary policy on the effectiveness of the policy itself, as well as on the interregional inequality. So I'm focusing only on that goal. So let me repeat, the model for the regional credit that I'm using in this model is not full-fledged regional credit model, because we all know there are so many other variables that we need to take into account. So those are the things that I want to highlight. Now, in closing, as I indicated at the beginning, I have been obsessed trying to understand I don't understand why there is macroeconomics, there is microeconomics. I don't even sort of accept the idea of there is conventional non-spatial economics and spatial economics, including regional science. To me, no matter what is the branch that we are studying, at the end, we have to come with one question. What does it mean for the welfare of the people? After all, our field, economics, is social science, and we need to ask that very simple question. Now, you can look at from many dimensions, whether you look at the welfare by region, and as Sudarno mentioned, you can look at by household group and so on. But that is really the questions here. And that's why this book is very small contribution showing only one dimension, and that is the spatial dimension. But overall, macro and micro, I've been obsessed to see, no, this cannot be separated. The same thing with macro and regional development. This cannot be separated. The problem is that it's not there. And after all, there is no faculty of multidiscipline, even though everybody talked about the importance of multidiscipline. So let me close by saying that, and let me also repeat what I want to thank the Bank Indonesia, especially BINS, their leadership, and also all the research assistants that accompany me. I don't know if Santi is here. Santi is one of the research sort of associate at the BINS who helped a lot in terms of contacting local leaders and local banks and so forth. And, sometimes we overlook the importance of that. And Budy, thank you for reminding me how old I am about playing tennis and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Iwan. Would you like to address the question about how to make decentralized fiscal more effective?
Yeah, I thought
This
I
was
already mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I will mention about local capture. So as long as the local capture cannot be eliminated, I don't see any possibility of improved outcome of the decentralization. Now, you can translate further. Does that mean we need reform, which is political reform, especially Pilkada reform? I will tend to say yes, but don't ask me what kind of reform. I'm not expert of the political reform, but that is the only solution. Because so far, what I see the problem is this local capture. It's not so much technical economics. It's not so much about the money is not there. This is another problem that I find a bit disturbing. Every time there is a problem, they always think, oh, we don't have money. We don't have enough money. No, there are so many problems, including about MSME problem. That's why I also thanks Ketua dari PPR for giving the comment. Sure, when we deal with the BPR, very different from state banks, for example. They are very different. But keep in mind that BPR has a very strategic role. I know most people think, oh, BPR is small and they're not important, they're not systemic and so forth. But keep in mind that more than 90% of the BPR's customers are MSME. And keep in mind that 99% of the unit of business in Indonesia are MSME. And keep in mind, 99% of that 99% are the M, which is micro. Now, here is the sad fact. If you look at inter-country, so comparison with other countries, just use one measure, bank credit to SME over GDP. Okay, so because we have to take into account the size of the economy. Collect the data from all over the world. The World Bank did that. Now, and then you also combine with the density of MSME. So in other words, how many MSME operation per 1,000 population? Guess what? Indonesia is among the highest density in the world in terms of MSME, but Indonesia is among the lowest credit over GDP to MSME. I remember the number is about 6% because the total credit in Indonesia has been low. In fact, if you compare with the Southeast Asian countries, total credit over GDP in Indonesia is only 32% or something, around 30 plus some percent, okay? And then there is a rule or, I don't know, regulation or appeal by the government, 20% of bank credit has to go to MSME. So you multiply 20% and 30%. It's about 6%. So in other words, our credit to MSME is very small. And this is the reasons why I cannot really understand how come everybody talk about the importance of MSME, but from the financial side, I'm talking only financial side because today we talk about financial, about credit here. I'm not talking about the other factors, but from the financial side, it's almost like impossible to expect that Indonesian MSME will have enough financial access. I'm not saying that financial factor is the only factors, okay? There are many other factors, many obstacles faced by the MSME. But just from the financial side, in fact, if I look at the ranking of the country, the closest to Indonesia in terms of credit to MSME over GDP is Zimbabwe. So our level of credit, bank credit to MSME is close to Zimbabwe. Now, compared to, let's say, China. In China, it's very high. Now, when I went to China, I mean, I tried to discuss with some of the bankers there. What they did is they use technology. in particular, they use AI. Because, you know, all over the world, if you talk to the bankers, why they don't lend to MSME, the answer is all unanimous. Oh, because it's high risky. That's why banks are not willing to lend. But for some reason, China was able to use technology, AI, to evaluate the potential borrowers. And that's why the share of the credits to MSME in China is very high, because they are not just using human credit analysts, but they use, you know, kind of a technology approach. So there are many sort of areas where we can make an improvement here. But I think in general, the questions here is coming back to what I said earlier. Whether you're dealing with macro or micro, always ask this question: what does it mean for the welfare of the people? Whether it is welfare people by region or by income group. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Iwan. And I believe your point about access to credit also aligns with what's being asked by Yekti Pratiwi, who is concerned that financial inclusion in Indonesia is not a focus of the government. So I believe Ibu Yekti asked about your what you think about this, and I guess it's very clear that it needs to be much improved and should be a priority of the government. Am I right to conclude that, Pa?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Pak Arianto Patunru, joining from Canberra, has a comment. He is curious about the title of Whisper in your book, Pak Iwan. Does it mean, can he conclude that monetary policy should be spatially aware without turning the central bank into a regional development agency? Is this a fair reading of the title, Pak Iwan? That's from Pak Arianto.
Yeah, short answer is yes. Let me give you an example. You know, in the Federal Reserve, which is the US Central Bank, they have 3 books every time they make the FOMC. FOMC is the meeting where they make the decision upon monetary policy. They have the blue book, they have the green book, and they have base book. The green book is macroeconomic condition. What is the condition in the US? The blue book is about specific kind of a sectors and so forth. But the base book is about region, because there are several Federal Reserve offices in the US. Now, I remember sometimes in the early 80s, there was a case that the FOMC is about to make the decision, that is to increase the interest rate. At that time, inflation was high and so forth. But then when they look at the base book, when the central bank people look at the base book, apparently there was some problem at the regional level. At that time, I remember the case in Hawaii. And because of that, they canceled the decision. Okay, so that is just one small example. Now, in Europe, there's a lot of cases, because I think it was Budy earlier saying that I need to collect more sort of international comparison. Many of the international studies along the line that I'm writing here are really in the case of Europe, because, you know, Europe, you have one central bank, ECB, but then there are so many countries, right? And then they look at the impact of the ECB policy, monetary policy, on different European member countries and so forth. So many studies along that line. And occasionally I cited some of the studies, but I agree with Budy, maybe I need to cite more studies.
Thank you, Pak Iwan. Mbak, you had mentioned Mbak Santi, and Mbak Santi is actually here joining, and she has a question, Pak, about projects in less developed regions having perceived higher risks than their fundamentals. And then, of course, that results in higher due diligence costs with perhaps weaker institutions and so on. How can we expand credit to these regions without compromising prudent banking practices, asked by a true banker?
Well, to me, as you can see, I don't know if my slide is still displayed here, but you can see in less developed region in Eastern Indonesia as well as in non-Java, credit is already exceeding the deposit. Okay, but my message in that book is be careful reading that data, because if we are not careful, we tend to jump to the conclusion, then the banking sector is already contributing to regional development and so on. No, as I said, there's so many credits are not really staying in the region, okay? And it does not really increase the production capacity. You know, trade is not production capacity. Trade is just survival. I'm sorry to say, in many poor regions, trade is survival. If you cannot do anything, but you need to earn money, what can you do? Just sell anything you want, right? So that's why it does not really increase the production capacity. So what is more important is not so much, how to increase the credit, but how to change the ideas of allocating credits to increase the production capacity. That is the only way that I can see how to mitigate this extreme unequal distribution between the region in Indonesia.
Thank you, Pak. I guess this is also related to Pak Joy Eli Tulung, I guess joining from Manado. Hello, Pak Joy. And he asked, well, what you had mentioned, Pak Iwan, how can the banking sector design regional sensitive credit policies to enhance local value added? I don't know if you would like to add more into that, how to do it.
Well, this is related to the question that Budy raised. What is the actual mechanism? So let me try to sort of make it simple. Of course, I simplify this, okay? When monetary policy is made in Jakarta, basically it determines the amount of liquidity available in the country. And by the banks, because actually the banks who do allocate those liquidity, banks decided, okay, and for example, big banks have branches throughout the regions, right? So bank decided how much is allocated for region A, how much region B, and region C, and so forth. That is the standard structural mechanism, how the monetary policy translate into the actual credit in the region. The problem is that if you are branches of the banks in the region, you have to follow some rules from the headquarters, right? So this is the typical problems between managers and sort of owners, because sometimes the owners wants to emphasize the importance of profitability, credit, more credit. And as you can see, there are a lot more credit than they deposit outside Java. But local bankers, they are more careful because they know there are some liquidity problems. And that's why in our survey, we see some gap between the actual loan to deposit ratio and the answer of the local bankers. And we noticed that I'm not saying the only one, but one of the reasons is because of the managers and owners kind of problem. And I think the case of BPR is the same thing. There are some owners who emphasize certain things, but then the operators of the banks itself is having some perception. That's why one of the suggestions in this book is that do not only rely on secondary data, because loan deposit ratio is secondary data. The best is really what I call go behind the wall, and that is ask directly the local bankers.
Thank you, Pak. This is also something that Ananto Aribowo asked. How can we encourage Javanese-based banks based in Java to channel their liquidity to lagging regions? So, Pak Ananto, Prof. Iwan just answered your questions. I guess not to look on secondary data, but also go to the regions to connect directly with those who need the capital. Pak Iwan, you are not showing in the camera whether you have moved yourself, so it's not within the camera. But if you could, be in
I don't know
front.
what happened. I'm still here.
Oh, it's still in. Okay. I leave that to the tech people here in the room.
Oh, I know what happened. But I hope you don't mind if because I know the camera, the battery in the camera is off.
Okay. All right. We are nearing the end of our event, but let me take one more question about okay, let me see. Oh, I lost it. Okay, here from Fajar Disna Kurniawan, and I think there is someone who raised his hand, which is Karisma Cahya Pradana. I believe Karisma is also from Cornell. Is Karisma willing to ask your question directly? Okay, so Karisma, if you want to ask directly. Okay, while waiting for Karisma, let me take this question from Fajar Disna from UGM, raising about the spatial regional approach for evaluating the effectiveness of monetary policy. And the obstacle of broken ladder. So I think perhaps Fajar has read the book or skipped the book. In your view, is it time, Pak Iwan, for Bank Indonesia to implement asymmetric monetary or macroprudential policies, such as regional differentiation of rates or credit rules? Would that risk creating new market distortions? So that is from Fajar Disna.
No, not exactly. As I indicated earlier, what is important is that to take into account a report. I don't know, I forgot the name. In Bank Indonesia, they have a report about the regional development. So every time they have a meeting, when the leadership of the Bank Indonesia is going to be making a policy, they have a couple of information in front of them, but one of them is about regional development report. But my point here is that we need to take into account that regional report more seriously, rather than just giving description about what happened with the regional development, but consider and incorporate that information into the decision in monetary policy. So rather than making asymmetric monetary policy, I would advise doing that in a way similar to what the ECB and the Federal Reserve is doing.
Right. So we are at the end of our time. While there are many more questions, I believe some of them were also already commented upon by Pak Iwan. So maybe perhaps everyone can refer back to the recording that we have later, but let me give this opportunity for short final message from Pak Iwan about the book. Maybe I should also note that we have a challenge for undergraduate economic students to write a book review on this book, and I know that many students are also attending this webinar to prepare for their book review and to listen to all the panelists here. So Pak Iwan, a short final statement about the book and what you hope that the younger economists get out of this.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you everybody for sort of giving comment and suggestions, and it's very useful. And this is only small contribution. I mean, there are many other works done by many other scholars who are very useful. So for most of the students, please do diligent in terms of reading many studies, including studies done by all the commentators that we have today. they're very useful. So this is what I did here is only a small contribution here. The point that I really try to emphasize, and this is I'm always telling to all my students here, as I said earlier, always ask what is the meaning of whatever you're studying, whether it's trade, whether it's a fiscal policy, monetary policy, what does it mean for the welfare of the society? That is the commonality of economics. That's the way I see it. I don't care whether it's spatial economics or non-spatial economics. The commonality is that what is the welfare of the society? In fact, on this point, the book that I'm writing now is really going beyond economics, actually, because I noticed there are some non-economic factors, including history. Different regions have different history. And then also in terms of the the religions, culture, and so forth. So I'm now collecting informations about different kind of non-economic factors of different regions. And I'm trying to incorporate that into the whole concept. To what extent those heterogeneity of non-economic factors contributes to different outcomes, including very bad inequality between the region in Indonesia. My hypothesis is that they contribute. So my hypothesis is they play a role. Now my challenge, the challenge to me is that how do I prove that? Whether they, for example, history factors will contribute to the inequality and so forth. Dualism, to what extent dualism affect that and so forth. And overall, I think to most of the students, once you understand or you studied economics, go beyond economics also, because life is more than economics. I mean, there's so many dimensions in life. And last but not least is really be careful reading data. Okay, and there's so many experiences that I had, and I'm just showing one example here. If you just look at the loan deposit ratio, things looks very good. If outside Java or Eastern Indonesia, bank allocate more credit than their deposit, that means good, right? And apparently it's not. So that's why you have to look at what is the story behind those secondary data. And last but not least, secondary data important, but what is the most important is really go behind the wall. If you don't know what is behind the wall, just go behind the wall. Meaning, if you don't know what is the real story of the data or observation that you encounter, just go there, go to the region. So my appeal to most of my students actually, try to travel, go outside Java. Indonesia is not Java. You go to Papua, you go to Maluku Utara, you are in different world basically. And as a social scientist, I don't want to call it economist. As a social scientist, we need to understand that the complexity and how they are all interrelated. I know this is too general, but that's my kind of standard advice to the young students. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Iwan. And again, I extend my thanks to everyone participating in today's webinar, not only the panelists, but also more than 220 people attending this book launch. And also on behalf of Forum Kajian Pembangunan, and I think a lot of students and economists, thank you to Bank Indonesia Institute for always supporting research and always supporting publication and dissemination of research, including to making this book available for free, for open access to be downloaded. And thank you, Pak Iwan, for having many of your books also open access. Please, students, you can access Pak Iwan's website to get a complete list of his publications, recent ones, past ones, and upcoming ones. So this is the end of our book launch this morning or this evening, wherever you are. Thank you for coming. And please look into the recordings if you missed anything. Don't forget to download the book. And thank you for Bank Indonesia Institute for hosting this with FKP. So I return the Zoom room to the MC, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lydia, for skillfully moderating, as well to our speakers for their insightful discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, before we end today's sessions and before we announce the top 3 most insightful questions asked by our participant here today at these sessions, we kindly request your participations in completing the confirmation assessment and evaluation form. It will take around 5 to 7 minutes to finish all the form. For your information, this assessment is internal evaluation instrument for Bank Indonesia Institute, aimed at measuring the effectiveness of material delivery and strengthening the literacy function of our program moving forward. You may scan the QR code on the screen, and your participations will give us an immense valuable insights for our future seminar. So thank you and best of luck.